Hey guys, welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today's video is another Hunter build, and it's one that I've been having a lot of fun with, and it's quickly become one of my favorite builds to run in the entire game. Summarized, this build allows your Gunpowder Gamble Grenade to deal over 5 times its base damage, which can flat out one-shot champions even in master level content when everything is set up properly, and overall it just has a ton of ability spam and just feels incredibly fun to use. As always, we have a lot to go over today, so let's jump right into the subclass. For your super, you can really use whichever super you would want to. I'm personally using Silence and Squall just because I'm trying to use a lot of different things I would normally use in PvE just to shake things up, and I found that overall it's actually a pretty decent super to use with this setup. Not only is it giving us really easy access to darkness buildup for our Transcendence meter, but it's also a really easy way to apply slowing and freezing effects, and these darkness based effects can boost our build in a number of other ways. So again, with that in mind, you can use any super that you want to with this build. There's no real restriction behind it. For your abilities, go with Gambler's Dodge to instantly refund your melee charge whenever you use your dodge ability, and for your melee, go with Threaded Spike. In my opinion, Threaded Spike is one of the best melee abilities for Prismatic Hunter, just because Threaded Spike on its own is a pseudo-infinite melee charge that has auto-tracking from a range, will sever targets on hit, and can create tangles all on its own. In addition, it can also suspend nearby enemies periodically, and with an ability spam focused setup like this, it's very valuable to have a melee that can auto-regen a lot of its energy all on its own. For your grenade, you can really use any of the grenades listed here. There is no restrictions behind which one you use, mainly because our aspect is going to be overriding our grenade temporarily, but also because it's entirely dependent upon the main weapon loadout you're going with. For my version of this build, I'm using 2 solar weapons primarily, and so because of that, I'm matching those with a solar grenade to allow Verity to stack up a damage boost for our grenade damage. For your aspects, the first one is Gunpowder Gamble. In short, as we get light and darkness debuff kills, it'll eventually build up charges. Once these charges are full, it'll replace our grenade charge with a Gunpowder Gamble grenade, which we can then throw and shoot midair to deal a ton of damage. Now, normally its damage is somewhat decent, but really struggles in higher difficulty content, where its damage starts to fall off and really can't make a lot of impact besides just clearing out minor enemies. With this build, we're basically boosting its damage by over 5 times its base damage, allowing it to one-shot champions even in stuff like master level content when we have all of our buffs and debuffs going. And the other aspect in pairing with it is Ascension. And Ascension is basically a mid-air dodge that will jolt nearby enemies and grant us Amplified. Not only is Amplified a movement speed bonus, but it's also a small amount of damage resistance we can stack on top with this build. So if you're using a setup like I am today, you have Amplified's damage resistance values and Frost Armor from Silence and Squall. Onto the fragments I would personally use. The first one I'm using is Facet of Balance. In short, whenever you defeat enemies with light damage, it gives you melee energy, and whenever you defeat enemies with darkness damage, it gives you grenade energy. This works really nicely for us because having a darkness-focused melee that has all of its perks that we already went over, this allows us a very easy way to get grenade energy back. And by having a light grenade like Gunpowder Gamble, for example, it's a very quick way for us to get melee energy back. And so it fits really nicely into the ability cycling and ability spam setup that we have here because it automatically gives us intrinsic energy back for our grenade when we use our melee, and vice versa. The next fragment I'm using is Facet of Dawn, just giving us Radiant anytime we deal damage with our powered melee. This is going to be our Threaded Spike for this build, and this is simply a 20% damage bonus to our weapons. The next fragment is Facet of Protection, which is going to give us damage resistance whenever we're surrounded by combatants. And this damage resistance value can stack on top of things like Amplified and Frost Armor from Silence and Squall. Next is Facet of Purpose, which is going to give us Frost Armor every time we pick up an Orb of Power. Now, the effect that Facet of Purpose gives you will change based on the super you're using. If you have a Solar super, it'll give you Restoration. For Arc, it'll give you Amplified. For Void, it'll give you a Void Overshield. And for Strand, it'll give you Woven Mail. So depending upon the super that you're using, this will change for you. And the last fragment is Facet of Hope, which gives us a massive boost to our class ability regen anytime we have an elemental buff applied to us. And this elemental buff can come from Radiant, it can come from Amplified, it can come from Frost Armor. There's tons of different sources this build has to actually activate that buff for us. And so it basically means we have a permanent increase to our class ability regen. One fragment alternative I do want to recommend is Facet of Courage. Facet of Courage is a 10% damage bonus to light abilities anytime you're dealing damage to a darkness debuff target. This is essentially another version of the Cauterized Darkness artifact perk, which I'll go over here in a minute, but it's basically a free 10% damage bonus for our build today. The only reason I'm not using this is because we already have so many other damage amplifications with this setup that a 10% damage bonus isn't truly that noticeable, but if you wanted to maximize Gunpowder Gamble's damage fully with this setup, I would recommend using Facet of Courage. Onto the artifact, the first mod I'm using is Refresh Threads. This will basically give us a little bit of ability energy anytime we pick up an elemental pickup matching our super. In my case, this is going to be a Stasis Shard to match our Stasis super. This works great with Elemental Coalescence, which basically gives us a periodic chance to create an elemental pickup matching our super as we defeat targets. This is basically a free way to generate stasis shards for us, and this means that it gives us a little bit more ability energy just for getting those kills. I'm also pairing this with Elemental Daze, which will cause an elemental explosion anytime we stun a champion. The main reason behind using this is just to deal a bit more damage to nearby enemies and the champion itself anytime that we stun them. The next mod is Cauterized Darkness. In short, this is a 30% damage bonus to solar sources anytime that we deal damage to a darkness debuff target, meaning stasis or strand debuff. For us, this can be the slowing or freezing effects our super can apply, or the severing and suspending effects our threaded spike can apply. These are all ways to get a 30% damage bonus against these targets, and again, this applies to all solar damage, so this means our Gunpowder Gamble Grenade becomes 30% stronger when we're dealing damage against these enemies. I'm also taking advantage of the Shield Crush artifact perk, which anytime that we have Woven Mail, Frost Armor, or a Void Overshield, our melee recharges faster and deals 25% more damage. And while we're Amplified or Radiant, our grenade recharges faster and deals 25% more damage. So for our build today, this means that anytime that we're Amplified or Radiant, which is pretty much all the time with this setup, it's a free 25% damage bonus and a massive recharge rate for our grenade, including our Gunpowder Gamble Grenade. The final mod I'm using is Tangled Web, which anytime we create a tangle, it'll suspend nearby targets. I'm mainly using this in combination with Threaded Spike, as it gives it a second way to apply a darkness-based debuff, which works really nicely with Gunpowder Gamble and stuff like Cauterized Darkness, because you get a free 30% damage bonus to those nearby enemies. In addition, thanks to stuff like Facet of Dawn, this then procs Radiant for us automatically, which is another 25% damage bonus to our Gunpowder Gamble Grenade. An alternative to Tangled Web that I also like using is Radiant Shrapnel. This will basically create scorching projectiles as we damage enemies when we're Radiant and when we defeat Scorch combatants. And with weapons that can Scorch on hit and us being Radiant basically all the time, this can be a very powerful effect that also builds nicely into Gunpowder Gamble's ignition-based effects. Moving on to the armor mods, the first one I'm using is a Solar and Strand Dual Siphon mod, just to allow our Solar and Strand weapons to periodically generate an orb of power after getting multi-kills. I'm also pairing this with a stack of Ashes to Assets, just to give us a bit more super energy anytime we get grenade kills. For our gauntlets, I'm going with a stack of Grenade Font and Melee Font, just to give us a bonus 20 stat points to grenade and melee stats anytime that we have a stack of Armor Charge. I'm also using Focusing Strike, which gives us class ability energy back anytime that we deal damage with Threaded Spike, which is a huge component of the ability spam and ability cycling this build has to offer. For our chest piece, I'm going with a stack of Health Font, again just giving us plus 20 health anytime we have a stack of Armor Charge. In addition, I'm using 2 resist mods based on the activity I'm in, just to best fit whatever enemies we're fighting. Onto our legs, I'm using a stack of Absolution just to give us ability energy across the board anytime we pick up an Orb of Power. And I'm also using 2 stacks of Solar Weapon Surges just to again benefit our primary weapon with this build. Finally, onto our cloak, and our exotic for today is Relativism. Relativism is the exotic cloak for hunters, and so the perk combination can vary depending upon which way you want to take this build. The combination I'm primarily going with is Spirit of Verity and Spirit of Inmost Light. Spirit of Inmost Light is mainly here to help cycle abilities and to enhance the ability spam aspect of the setup. Again, this works with things like Shield Crush to give us a ton of ability regen, on top of any other modifiers or perks that we might have to improve ability regen. And Spirit of Verity is basically an escalating damage bonus for our grenade as we get matching weapon kills. This is why I mentioned earlier in the video that if you wanted to use a different kind of grenade, you might want to swap your weapon loadout to match the affinity of the grenade. One thing to keep in mind about Spirit of Verity is that it doesn't directly work with Gunpowder Gamble in the way you're probably expecting. What I mean by this is, let's say you're using Magnetic Grenade with this setup. To take advantage of Spirit of Verity, you need to get Void Weapon kills in order to give yourself a grenade damage bonus. Even though Gunpowder Gamble is a solar ability and doesn't match the affinity of Magnetic Grenade, it will still get that grenade damage bonus. So again, don't worry about matching Gunpowder Gamble as a solar ability, just worry about matching whatever grenade you have equipped here. Again, the reason I'm using Swarm Grenade is because it matches the elemental affinity of the weapons I really want to use with this setup, not necessarily because it has to match Gunpowder Gamble. And then finally, onto the mods, I'm using a stack of Powerful Attraction, which finally has full compatibility with Ascension, allowing us to pick up any nearby Orbs of Power anytime we cast Ascension. In addition, I'm also using 2 stacks of Class Font just to give us plus 40 stat bonuses to our class stat anytime we have an Orb of Power. So if you're keeping track, this is plus 40 class, plus 20 health, plus 20 melee, and plus 20 grenade anytime we pick up an Orb of Power for the next 10 seconds. As far as the stats go, the main one you want to focus on is grenade damage. Grenade damage up to 100 will improve your regen, and from 100 to 200 will give you an escalating damage bonus up to 65% at 200 stat points. Now I only have 127 intrinsically, and we're pretty much going to get to 200 by utilizing our Grenade Font mod and our weapon today, and I'll go into how that works a little bit later. But keep in mind, you want to basically try to max out your 200 grenade stats as close as you can. Besides grenade, I would also recommend investing in your melee or your class, either directly through your armor or indirectly through mods and other perks. This is just to help build into the ability spam focus that this build has, and making sure that you have at least 70 stat points in these categories allows you to have the same regen as you did before Edge of Fate. Besides that, I'm also personally investing into our super just to give us the maximum amount of super energy gained back from all sources, just to build into the super regen and the ability spam focus side of this build, because that's what I particularly enjoy. On to the weapons themselves. For this build, you can really use any kind of weapon combination. Since so much of this build is happening because of our stat bonuses, or armor interactions, or subclass effects, the weapons are kind of just there to enhance what ability spam is already present. So with that in mind, if you don't like the weapons I'm using today, or if you want to build into a different aspect of this build via the weapons, you can absolutely do that. There is no customization limit on these weapons, just make sure to update specific elemental affinity mods whenever you equip them. The two weapons I'm primarily taking advantage of are the new Solstice weapons, Tide Apex, and Festival Flight. Both of these weapons have enhanced attrition orbs on them, which gives us a ton of orbs of power. On Festival Flight, I'm also taking advantage of Blast Distributor. This will give us a stacking bonus to our grenade stat as we deal damage with the weapon up to 5 stacks. Each stack of Blast Distributor will give us plus 10 grenade stat, which means that simply by firing the weapon, we can easily have plus 50 grenade stat basically all the time. And so for Gunpowder Gamble and building into this setup, this allows us to focus our stat points into other aspects and still have a huge damage chunk from the grenade stat bonus. And for Tide Apex, I'm also taking advantage of Burning Ambition, which is simply an auto-scorching ability, allowing us to scorch enemies as we deal damage to them. For our exotic, I was mainly looking to have an exotic that could deal a ton of damage on its own, and kind of have a set it and forget it type of playstyle, where you don't need to constantly be using it all the time to take advantage of it. Dragon's Breath ended up being a very good pick for this, because it allows us to scorch targets and cause a ton of ignitions in a large area of effect. Fitting into a similar role, stuff like Parasite works really nicely, and then I've also found that Finality's Augur is actually a really good pick for boss DPS, just because this is a weapon that works entirely in the background, freeing us up to use our other weapons, and also cycle our abilities for boss damage. Again, it's not something you have to have for this build, it's just a thing that I found works really nicely with it. But again, there really isn't any kind of weapon restrictions with this build, and you don't have to use any of the weapons I'm showing you here today. If you wanted to use this build in a raid or dungeon setting and have it be mainly fitted out for boss DPS, you could swap all 3 weapons pretty much instantly and nothing would change. The customization of this build is really endless as far as the weapons go, so I hope you guys experiment and find the right playstyle for you. With that said, that's pretty much the build for today. Like I said at the start of the video, this has quickly become one of my favorite builds in the game, and is definitely my favorite currently on Hunter, just because of how much fun this build is and the synergy between the different aspects and abilities. I've just been having a lot of fun using it in all different kinds of content. Dim link is down in the description below if you guys want to try the build out for yourself, and I hope you guys have as much fun with it as I've been having. I greatly appreciate your continued support in these videos, and as always, thank you so much, and have a great day.